Good morning. My name is Gretchen Stallings, and I'm the Executive Director of Volunteer New Hampshire. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. Before we get started with our keynote address, we have a special person to celebrate. Every year, we make it our mission to recognize one volunteer manager who, in the minds of our nomination review committee, has demonstrated exemplary skills in their field. It is now my pleasure to introduce our great Governor, Sununu, who will announce the 2021 Governor's Outstanding Volunteer Manager of the Year.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Gretchen. It's great to see everybody. I'm like seeing the whole the room kind of get populated here. Look, I know it's a little odd that we have to do this over Zoom. It is great that we have the technology and the ability to do it, and we don't have to miss what is really an awesome opportunity to highlight a variety of things. So we're going to announce the big winner of this year's Governor's Award for Volunteerism. But just if I could take a second, and first, obviously, a huge thank you to everybody across the entire state, frankly, who just had to give 110%, had to give 110% just to create pathways and opportunities for individuals that were struggling, and there's no one that wasn't struggling. In this past year, we could all write a novel on how COVID affected us, how COVID affected our families, our workplace, our health and safety, our security, family members in long-term care, whatever it was, from nursing and healthcare all the way down to education. Everybody just had to do something a little different, do something a little extra to kind of get through it. And in New Hampshire, there's a lot to be proud of. We really crushed it. It was a very tough time with very tough decisions by all of us. But at the end of the day, when you have, not just the management of, I think, COVID through the pandemic, the crisis stage of the pandemic with PPE and testing and all that kind of stuff, and Safer 2.0, which is all the restrictions that we had to, put on businesses while still keeping them open. And then you get into the vaccine and the incredible opportunities of vaccine administration, very much driven on service, on volunteerism, on folks stepping up and out of their comfort zones and saying, how can I help? How can I help just make this thing faster and just get a better product out of our community and try to get ourselves out of this crisis? And because of that spirit, if you will, that we see across the state, those extra efforts, we've just come out of this faster than almost anywhere else in the country. We really have. We're very proud that we were ranked the safest state in the country very recently. We still have one of the strongest economies in the country. So we've really kind of found that balance, and it isn't the governor. It isn't what happens at the State House. State House has been a very lonely place over the past year. I can't wait for, the volunteers start bringing the tours back in. That's a whole different story. But it's, we had to kind of provide that framework and some of that leadership. But at the end of the day, none of that matters if you don't have folks on the ground. If you don't have folks on the ground, whether it's administering vaccine or visiting long-term care facilities or working with schools, helping kids with technology, doing the remote learning, whatever it was, all of this stuff only happens to the success that we had when folks are willing to step up. And it's just very proud to know that we have a state, that granite spirit, that live free or die spirit is about service. We call it, my dad told me this term once, he calls it tithing our time, right? And that's what it is. We tithe our time, we give of ourselves, because we have to appreciate that while we all have very, very busy lives, especially in this chaotic 21st century world, everything moves at lightning pace. At some point, you do have to kind of step back, take a breath and say, look, is there something else I can help out with my community? And it can be something that you think is small to you, but it's not to somebody else. It can be incredibly impactful to an individual. And that is obviously not just fulfilling for ourselves, but just the net benefit you get to our communities as a whole. So that is, I apologize for being a little bit long-winded there, but that's a big, big thank you to all the folks that stepped up, did a little bit extra, and we get to lead the country in a lot of this stuff, and we get to come out of this a little bit faster. This summer is going to be awesome. It really is, but it's not just because of luck. It's because we've really all, I think, pitched in and worked hard to build that, to earn it, to design it that way. So cannot thank you enough. So with that, this year I get to award the 2021 Governor's Conference on Volunteerism Award for Volunteerism. This award was created, the Volunteer Manager of the Year, I believe, or at least Gretchen has told me this. I think my father created this award back in the 80s. And that tells you how old my father is. He's still with us. God bless it, and still giving me a lot of grief on everything. But every once in a while, he got something right. He's my dad. I get to criticize him a little bit. he got something right, and this was one of them. He was with 8 kids, and just dedication to community, and my mom as well. They really, really believed in that concept of tithing your time, volunteerism, service, giving of yourself, not just because it helps your community, but it helps yourself. And that's something that we really try to promote in high schools, our community college, our university system, taking that year, right, of service. It's great to do volunteerism in your community here and there and get a few hours here and there, but to really understand and appreciate when you give of yourself and immerse yourself into something at the level that sometimes communities need that effort, the fulfillment you get, right? The work ethic, struggling through problems, the teamwork, team building, all of those sorts of things, those incredible skills, life skills, frankly. When I was working in my previous life at Waterville Valley and running my resort, where if you saw those words, AmeriCorps or Service Corps or whatever it might be, come on somebody's resume, those are the folks that we wanted to hire. Those are the folks that we knew that could give 110% and really be there for ourselves and our customers, and those skills that really come with that. They're just inherent, which is awesome. So we only get to give one award of the year out. And obviously there are hundreds of folks that are very, very deserving, of course. But this year, we are giving the award of service to, and I don't even know, is there like a drum roll? I'm not quite sure. I don't know if this person is even aware they're going to be receiving the award. But this year, we are awarding it to Kathleen Stuart, who worked with AmeriCorps Senior Companion Program. Oh, there she is. Hey, how are you? I guess they were prepared. For those of you who don't know, Kathleen worked with the AmeriCorps Senior Companion Program. She's been there for a few years now, and obviously that program through this COVID pandemic was so critical. It was absolutely critical. Can I talk a little bit? Do you guys mind? Gretchen, can I talk a little bit about Kathleen? Can I talk about you? Okay, I'm just going to brag on you for a little bit, Kathleen. Early on, as everyone knows, the state, everybody, we're all struggling to find something as simple as PPE. We all learned that term very early on. And there were certain individuals, Kathleen being one of them, that went above and beyond making sure that they had PPE, they had some of these protective things when in the very early aspects of the pandemic, when it was all about protection and kind of shielding ourselves through this very scary time, especially for the elderly population, which we knew was incredibly vulnerable to the COVID pandemic and the virus. She helped develop the universal precaution training for all volunteers, which is awesome. A lot of us were kind of writing a playbook without ever having played the game before. And Kathleen stepped up and did that. And that became something that was really a base for a lot, not just for her and the folks she was working with, but for other organizations across the state, taking those universal precaution training and actually bringing it to their organizations throughout all of New Hampshire was just absolutely awesome. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff that comes with that, with the homemade crafts and cooking of the meals and just spending time, the friendship, the companionship that so many of these individuals simply did not have. I mean, we hear stories now all the time of, an individual who finally gets to see their mom for the first time after 12 months because of the outbreaks and there was isolation and all of that. And they're touching stories, and it's a reminder how tough this past year has really been. But Kathleen, all the folks she worked with, all those folks on the front lines that provided that companionship, frankly, that love, if you will, when a lot of us couldn't be there for our loved ones. You guys were there. And so we cannot thank you enough. Congratulations, Kathleen. You knocked it out of the park, and you just exemplify everything the 603 is all about. So congratulations.
I don't think there's another person in the world that deserves it more for all that she has done, not only for the senior companions, but for our visitees also.
Senior companions are able-bodied seniors that support homebound seniors in their own communities. The average age of a senior companion is 76 years old, and they're just remarkable. They're out in the community doing everything from respite to support caregivers in their homes so they have a break for a loved one with dementia. They do companionship. So they might go over and play cards with somebody or look at photo albums or watch old movies. And they also traditionally will do transportation, which means driving people to a doctor's appointment or to help them get their prescriptions or medicine. At this time, we are grounded. Companions are not in the field until We've been given the go just for safety. So for the time being, they are doing telephone reassurance phone calls, as well as a pen pal program as some additional forms of service. Kathleen is a program coordinator extraordinaire. She has the lower half of the state from Hooksett down, and she has about 35 or 40 companions. She not only intimately knows all the companions and what their preferences are for who they'd like to work with in the community, but she knows what we call the visitees, the people the volunteers are with and helping. She knows their needs. She's always supporting. She's helping do trainings for volunteers. She's helping recruit new volunteers. She's marketing to let people in the community know that we have this program so we can offer free supports. She does everything. She manages her volunteers above and beyond expectation.
Whenever I need help, I'm never disappointed with her answer. I am very comfortable talking with her, for instance. Kathleen always greets us with a sweet smile. She always has an encouraging word for us, and it is always great to feel that you have a supervisor giving you undivided attention to help you when we're in our in-services. She always makes time for each of us and answers our questions.
You name it, Kathleen finds a solution. Everything that we do, she always wants to go above and beyond. She doesn't want to just do her job. She wants to do her job and then some. And she always wants to do it in a creative, outside the box kind of way to make it meaningful, to make it different, to make it interesting. And the amount of work that comes out of her office is truly remarkable. She just doesn't stop.
Hey, I had this quote: "Those who bring sunshine to the lives of others cannot keep it from themselves." Kathleen Stuart is a sunshine spreader.
She single-handedly really controls her entire half of the state, does all the nuts and bolts, and she does it with love. It's not like just a job. She will bake cookies. She will go out of her way to do extra fundraising to get some little extras for our volunteers, because it's not just a job. You know, we feel like it's a family, and she's always trying to think what would be in their best interest, what would make them happy. Because she, like you said, she just wants to spread love and joy.
Making others happy makes her happy, and that is such a gift.
Gretchen, you're muted.
I am. I didn't realize. So see, they mute me and then they expect me to remember to unmute myself. But I understand why they mute me. I would probably mute me too. So, hey, thank you so much, Governor Sununu, for helping us to celebrate Kathleen. Kathleen, would you like to say a few words, or it's okay if you don't? And now you're muted.
Everyone, thank you so much. I'm so surprised and honored, and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for my great team, my family, and all my companions. You're gonna make me cry. I love my companions. They're all wonderful. They inspire me every day. And you make me want to do this job above and beyond. Seniors, and just helping seniors and being there for them is an honor for me and for all my companions. I just know it is. But I just want to thank you all so much for everything. This is very unexpected, but again, such an honor. And I couldn't be more proud to be a part of the Senior Companion Program. So thank you.
Well, Kathleen, congratulations once again. Thank you all for sharing in our celebration of the Volunteer Manager of the Year. And so it is now time for us to move forward. It's wonderful to gather together to kick off our 4-day Governor's Conference on Volunteerism. And as we do gear up for the keynote in just a few minutes, in the chat, I'd like you to share what community means to you, so we can all begin to kind of get to know each other a little bit. Let's see. So here at Volunteer New Hampshire, we engage communities to solve local challenges through volunteerism. We coordinate and administer AmeriCorps resources that come into New Hampshire. We connect volunteers with meaningful opportunities to serve through Get Connected, our free portal where nonprofit organizations can post and manage volunteer opportunities. We recognize volunteers and volunteer champions like Kathleen with our presentation of Spirit of New Hampshire Award and the Governor's Outstanding Volunteer Manager of the Year Award. We support the growth of volunteer programming by stewarding essential resources, such as the Volunteer Generation Fund to local nonprofits. And last but certainly not least, we provide training and professional development opportunities for volunteers and volunteer managers, especially like this conference this week, the Governor's Conference on Volunteerism. Over the course of the next 3 days, we'll be holding 20 additional sessions with topics ranging from fundraising to accessibility to effective communication. We're also highlighting a track of sessions focused on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The 1 p.m. session block will only have one offering each day, and that session is specifically focused on these themes. The overall theme for our conference this year is moving forward together, embracing change. We hope that all of the sessions inspire you to think creatively and with generosity. We hold resources with the power to impact our communities. Let's go into this week of the conference sessions with that at the front of our minds. Let's not only look for opportunities to improve ourselves and our own programming, but also for tools and connections that will move us toward a bright future. With this in mind, I encourage you to visit volunteernewhampshire.org to see what other conference sessions you might be interested in. So the registration for each session will remain open until it's over, and all recordings will be shared on our website. Now, at this conference, this would not be possible without support from the greater community. To that end, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for their generosity, especially our conference Changemaker sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and Tufts Health Plan Foundation. If your organization is interested in partnering with us this year or next, please reach out through our website to learn more. And finally, I invite you to use the hashtag VolunteerNH and tag Volunteer New Hampshire if you are posting about the conference on social media.
Thank you, Gretchen. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Katie Pazienza, and I am an AmeriCorps Program Coordinator with Goodwill Northern New England. I've had the pleasure of serving as the chair of the planning committee for the 2021 Governor's Conference on Volunteerism, alongside Michaela Collins of Volunteer New Hampshire, and a truly dedicated and creative planning team. We are thrilled to bring you this series of workshops to support you in embracing change through professional development, opportunities to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion, and strengthening volunteer programs and organizations throughout New Hampshire and beyond. Our community of service-minded individuals is amazing, and together, I know that we can make the world a better, more just place. I want to thank the Planning Committee for their great energy, for bringing feedback and new ideas to the table, and overall, for their commitment to planning a successful, expanded virtual Governor's Conference. It has been wonderful to collaborate with each and every one of you, and an honor to serve as this year's committee leader. Before we get started with the keynote address, though we've had lots of opportunities to practice over the last year, I want to take a moment to familiarize everyone with some of the features of Zoom to keep in mind throughout the conference. We encourage you all to have your camera on to create a sense of togetherness, though please consider turning off your camera if there are distractions in your background or if you need to step away. Please mute your audio unless you are speaking to cut down on background noise. If you have a question or comment to share over the audio, you can raise your hand by selecting the option from the reactions button, or you can write a question or comment in the chat box. The chat box is also a great place to share relevant comments or resources that you think others might find useful. You'll see the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We'll have volunteers monitoring the chat throughout the sessions to share relevant content with our presenters. If you're having trouble hearing or being heard, you may want to call in through a phone line. If you encounter this or any other technical difficulties, or if you have a question or comment for the session volunteers, you can use the chat to send a direct message to Jen, or you can text 603-715-4209. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Shanita Williams, Associate Vice President of Talent Engagement and Inclusion at Southern New Hampshire University. For the last 15 years, Shanita has coached individuals and more recently organizations on cultivating engaged and inclusive cultures. As a leader in HR, she partners with senior leaders and executives to understand employee experience trends and develop strategies that help the organization recruit, retain, empower, and develop world-class talent. Her keynote address is entitled Community Building: How to Foster Inclusive and Connected Spaces. Dr. Shanita Williams, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Everyone. Thank you so much for that really warm introduction and great experience to see Kathleen be recognized for her hard work. Congratulations again, Kathleen. This year's theme is moving forward together and embracing change. And I don't know about you, but I didn't have a lot of change. Anyone? No? I think we all experienced quite a bit of change last year, and we still are continuing to experience it. When we think about, we've changed the way we've maybe gone to school, the way we've done work, the way we've communicated, the way we've connected, and the way we've treated each other. This year has given me an opportunity to pause and really reflect on the power of community. And as we think about moving into 2021 and carrying all of our learnings with us, I know there's one thing that's for certain that I learned, that we are definitely stronger together. And we have been powered by the amazing works and service that our volunteers have contributed over this past year and for many years prior. So today, we are going to talk about community building and how to foster inclusive and connected spaces. So the two things that we're going to talk about is really first exploring the power of community. And you've already helped us get started this morning by sharing your perspectives on what community means to you. I think it is a personalized experience, something unique to us and based upon our own lived experiences. But we're going to talk about that and the power of belonging on human relationships, how it fuels us and impacts our performance. So we'll spend the first half talking a little bit about that, but then we'll move into some practical tips. And I'd love to hear from you along the way. What are some of the tips that you use to help foster the connected spaces and strengthen relationships? We heard some great testimonials about Kathleen and some of her intentional behaviors and acts that help to do that. I'm sure you also have many as well. So today we'll talk through some tips and we'll hopefully share best practices with one another. So what is community? You've all started the conversation off really well. And when you look in the chat, you see a diversity of thought on this subject. We see it being about caring about one another. It's about making sure that everyone is included. It is about, I saw someone put the interdependence of relationships. There's so many pieces to community. So what we're going to do first is pause and think a little bit about first, what are the dimensions that make up the lens that we look through when we think about community? So first, there are two dimensions of community. The first dimension is the structure of community, right? It is the body of people, right? That's often defined by geographic location or one's proximity to another. It is simply the structures of community. Now, I belong to the Goffstown community proudly. You all belong to communities in your own respective neighborhoods. But it doesn't limit itself to just geographic location. We also have communities based on structures that are, unique based by activity. So maybe gyms or clubs, organizations, the Volunteers Conference. We can belong to so many different structures within the world that help us. This dimension, I would say, is the popular one that we talk about on the world. Structure can be defined by state, town, but it can also be community based on your experiences, people who have shared ideas and goals. Now, the structure of community is really powerful because that is also an opportunity for people to connect. It gives people an opportunity to plug into a space, to find a gym, to find a club, to find a place that they can volunteer and give back. The structure of community is such an important aspect of helping us build inclusive spaces and connected spaces. If our structures didn't exist, people wouldn't know how to plug in, how to join. We're sharing information in the chat now, how to learn more about various groups. Those structures are really helpful in helping us try to get connected as individuals. But there's another dimension of community that sometimes gets overlooked, but I think this group, it has it at its core. The second dimension that we have to think about is the experience of community. So we have the structures of community, but there's an experience that a lot of you alluded to in your definition of community. The experience of community is all about the quality of the connection. It's not just going into a building or, in my neighborhood, just driving into my garage. It's about feeling connected to my neighbors, connected to my area, to everyone on my cul-de-sac. There's an experience that's important to lean into if we're truly going to think about how do we truly foster the connected and inclusive spaces. Now, interesting thing to note is that it's about the quality of the human interactions. It's not about the number of interactions, even though there's been tons of research that says the more you interact with people, right, the more you feel like you belong. But I don't know about you. In this past year, I've met a ton of people that I actually have not seen face to face and have still felt connected and maybe only met with them one time. So what is that? What is it about the dimension of experience that pulls us together, even if we don't know one another? When you think about the work that you do, that we've all done in volunteerism, there's an experience there that we try to create. That service feeling is an action, but that comes from our hearts. And people can feel, right, the nature of that relationship and the humanity that's in every act we do. So when we think about the two dimensions, structure and the experience, feel free to type in the chat for yourself. Which dimension do you feel like we can lean more as either a community or a society? Feel free to throw your ideas in the chat. Where do you think our opportunity is? Now, when I did some research, it's interesting that we have structures of community and we know that the experience matters. A study was done with Cigna in 2020, a loneliness index, and this was actually done prior to COVID. It said in the United States, 61% of people report that they're lonely. Now, I don't have all the data to segment it and share which groups are most impacted, but I think looking at that statistic by itself really helps us think, and for me, get curious about, if we have communities, we have plenty of structures in the world, what is it about this number that we can learn from? If people are belonging to communities, these structures, you can technically, and I think they said about 40% at work identified as being alone. We can actually be right next to someone and feel lonely. And that's why that experience component is so important. I know Governor mentioned earlier, he said, I feel a little lonely. I can't wait till people come back in and connect. There is something about connection, either in the physical or the emotional, that really helps us really think about how do we create these experiences in the spaces that we frequent. Another stat that I found was really specific to communities, like neighborhood research. And in this research, it said that only 19% of adults in the US reported a strong emotional connection to their communities. Again, this really highlighted for me that while we can belong to very large neighborhoods and be really in close proximity to others, that there's an emotional connection component that is really important to explore. And we know there's a ton of research that says those who are connected to their communities, right? Civic engagement is so important. Volunteerism helps people feel that connection to their communities. But as I think about our charge today and think about how do we build connected and inclusive spaces, the studies are telling us we definitely have to lean more into the experience and not necessarily just the structures. So when we look at them side by side and really look at the structure of community and the experience of community, for me, I think it gives us insight into where we can continue to lean in. I think, to Governor's point, we've done a tremendous job this past year connecting with one another, helping each other out. We've all had to learn, relearn, help each other out and connect in new ways. When I look at the structure of community, though, it helps me think about what it means to be in a community. And that's important. Social identities are tied to the groups that we belong to. But when I look at the experience of community, it tells us, for me, what it feels like to be in community with others. So just sit with that for a second. Being in a community and being in community. And that is based on, the difference to me is based on how we, leverage the power of our human relationships and lean into that compassion and that care that we heard Kathleen has been doing with her own areas. Now, the structure of community can sometimes feel very transactional. We go into places, we go into stores, we come out, we go to school and we come out, we see each other on the street, we walk by, we say hi. Sometimes it can feel transactional. But the difference in just making that eye contact when we are crossing one another and that smile that looks just a little different, sometimes, like Governor said, it's the small things that is powerful enough to change someone's experience. So let's lean into a little bit about kind of how this works from the Maslow's hierarchy point of view. Now, many of you have probably seen this, but when we're talking about a sense of belonging, when we're talking about sense of community, we are at the heart talking about what it means to belong. And when you look at the definition, and when you look at the actual hierarchy there, you can see that it really points right to the middle, belonging being core to our human, really our ability to thrive. And when we talk about belonging, it's about our emotional need. This is not something that's a nice to have. We're actually wired to be connected to others, to be seen and to see and to be seen by others. And so when you look at this, it's not about just being a part of a structure, but it's also being seen in that. And that is what helps us get to those more inclusive and connected spaces. Sometimes we think about those spaces as formal structures, but I'm going to talk with you a little bit about how you can do that even in a Zoom meeting today. So the impact of belonging is immense. There's a ton of literature that tells us it's important not only to organizations to be able to thrive, but to really human beings being able to thrive. But when we think about the impact in our communities and specifically organizations, we know that when people feel seen and when people feel valued and when they feel respected and they feel connected, that we see a huge increase in performance. We're willing to give that discretionary effort, right? If I were to ask you right now to raise your hand, right? To just raise your hand where you sit right now. I want you to do that with me. I can't see everyone, but I want you to just raise your hand. Chances are I cannot see everyone, but I'm thinking that if you rose your hand actually probably didn't go higher than your head. Now, if I asked you to raise your hand like a 5-year-old kindergartner, what are you going to do now? Anything different? Yay! Yes, right? The hands go higher. So what's the difference? What's the difference between doing what was asked and really leaning in? There's a different, when you add experiences and color to things, it helps people give that discretionary effort. And that's what we find with belonging. People can come in and volunteer, or people can come in and do a job, but when people feel connected, they're almost performing like a 5-year-old kindergartner, giving you more and more and more than you've asked for. And I think I heard Kathleen say that this motivates her to continue to go above and beyond. And that above and beyond is connected to that sense of belonging. And we know that, you see here, studies show that when people feel that, like that they're seen and they're connected, that, I mean, you're going to contribute to your full potential. I feel like a lot of us are operating, we have so much potential in us, but we're only scraping the surface. But what would it be like if we felt connected and respected in every single space, that I had a relational interaction and experience of belonging in every space that I went to? How might that transform my own personal potential? And last but not least, it's all about really what happens, the outputs of belonging. Studies have shown that if people feel like they belong, they're more likely to stay. They're more likely to stay in those friendships. They're more likely to stay in school, more likely to stay in the volunteer organizations. All of these things, we are more likely to stay if we feel like we're being heard, like we're being seen, and we feel connected and have authentic relationships. So we know there's tremendous power in the impact of belonging. And if you look at some research, actually, if you were all to Google on your own time, Deloitte, if you type in Deloitte research 2020 and type in comfort and connection and contribution, they've done an amazing research on what this looks like in practice. But at a high level, when I think about the impact of belonging, we don't want people to just feel comfortable. I think that's the first step. We want people to feel comfortable with being their authentic selves. But the next is to connect, to feel like not only can I be myself, but I have healthy relationships, and that those relationships inspire me to contribute. So comfort, connection, and contribution are great outputs of this experience. This is a quote that I really love from Audre Lorde. It says, "Without community, there's no liberation. But community must not mean shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense," say that 5 times, pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. It is about, we need each other. When you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it says we need belonging. So if I need belonging, then that means you need belonging, and she needs belonging, and he needs belonging, and they need belonging. And that means we need each other. And in order for us to move forward together, right, we have to have that sense of community, or there will be no liberation, no getting to the change that we want. But when we think about community, I saw someone say in the chat that community is about really leveraging, right, the beauty that everybody brings. It's not that in order to belong to this community, you have to be different. You have to let go and be like me. It's about you showing up as your authentic self, not being a culture fit, but being a culture add, something that you add. You bring a different perspective and experience to the table, and we value that from all walks of life. Now, with it, it's also making sure that we acknowledge it. We want to acknowledge that in this community, we all bring unique things to the table, and the art is really figuring out, now, how do we leverage all of that? So now we're going to talk about the how. We've explored the power, those 2 dimensions of community that are so powerful. We know that structures are needed in order for us to find places to plug in and build our social identity. That's important. But we also learned, right, that the experiences is so important to us feeling connected in a sense of belonging. So then what are some practical ways then that we can really lean into this, like really and intentionally do this in every space that we do, that we frequent? The answer is right in front of you. I want you to pause and look at this word, community. And if you want the answer to how we do it, it's actually in front of you. Do you know how many words you can make with the word community? For some of our Scrabble experts, some of you are probably like, I know I can make a ton of words. I want you to think about how many words could you make with this? Because the answer is actually in this visual. You can actually, I'm going to save you some time because we can't be here all day. It actually is 110 words you can make with the word community. And I'm going to click through a few slides and I'm going to see if you can catch the answer right before you. So the answer to driving community in inclusive spaces starts with did anyone catch that? If you caught it, put the phrase in the chat. Let's see who caught the answer. I'm going to do it one more time. If we want to know how to foster inclusive and connected spaces, that is the answer. Inclusion starts with I, and I have to commit to unity. I have to commit personally, not just the organization's purpose, but I have to take a conscious and concerted effort to commit to fostering unity everywhere I go. Now, we're going to break that down a little bit, but I love this quote. And it says, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. We know that communities are powered by individuals. And as we saw with Kathleen, every individual can make an impact on a life. But if we want to know how to really, move forward together and embrace change, and if we want to leverage the power of community in doing so, we have to be willing to do the introspective work and lean in to thinking about ourselves. What are the things that I need to know and reflect on for me in order to awaken my spirit as to the things that are within my control to make a difference? So the first thing that we're going to do is focus on I, right? Inclusion starts with I. So what are some specific things that we can all do? And I want you all to feel free to throw it in the chat as well. If you have other ideas on how you can do some introspection on how to get to, moving forward and building inclusive spaces, feel free to throw your ideas in there. But the first thing that you want to do is you first want to make sure that you're honest with yourself. 2020 for me taught me a lot. I started to learn for myself because now I'm working at home and in the office. So I'm actually, as soon as Zoom is over, I'm at home. As soon as Zoom is on, I'm at work. And moving through those spaces challenged me to really think about who I am. One of the things that is essential to building inclusive spaces is authenticity. My question for you is, when are you your most authentic self? Are there certain groups of people, certain meetings, certain activities, or certain spaces where you feel like your most authentic self? If you can name that space, or if you cannot name that space, there's wisdom in both. For me in this journey this last year, I learned that there were certain places where I felt like I was my most authentic self. And then there were spaces where I was a little less of my full authentic self. I was my work self or that meeting self. And I had to come to terms with that and be honest, because I think it became more clear because I was going in and out of meetings. I'd go, I have 3 children, so I'd run down and, check on them. And then I come back to my meeting and there was this like performance energy that I had to lock into. And I realized there are spaces where I am my most comfortable, most authentic self. And there are spaces where maybe I cover myself up a little. Now, here's the thing. If we're going to foster inclusive and connected spaces, we have to be willing to be our authentic selves as well, because we are all looking at one another, right? And trying to figure out, is it safe to be myself? And if you can show me that it's safe to be yourself and it's safe, then it's safe for me to be myself. And so I had to do that work, really looking at it and going, what are the conditions with which I do show up as my best authentic self? What are the conditions and the environment and the influencers to that? And how can I lean into that and be a little bit more vulnerable, right? With showing a little bit more of myself in every new space and thinking about how I challenge myself to do that. because inclusion, so belonging is a feeling, but inclusion is an action. And so I had to think really intently about if I'm going to engage in inclusive acts, if I'm going to try to bring people, to the table, if I'm going to try to authentically elevate the voices of others, I have to also be operating in my authentic self. So I want you to think about that. Is there an opportunity for you to even peel back the layer a little bit more of who you are? Are you able to be just a little bit more vulnerable? And for me, when I peel back the layers of why, it was sometimes challenging to be my most authentic self, it really did come down to some of my own thinking. I think when I look back at 2020, one of the lessons that we learned in inclusion, starting with I, is that we're not perfect. And I think coming to terms with perfection, I don't know if anybody else suffers from the imposter syndrome and trying your best to meet the bar that whatever society has told us we have to meet. Sometimes we're hard on ourselves. And because we strive for this perfectionist mentality, it reduces our ability to be vulnerable. If you're trying to be perfect, what would happen if we just admitted, I'm a mess? I'm a mess and I'm just trying to figure it out. And I'll tell you, I've done that a few times. And the other person said to me, thank God, so am I. And so we have in that moment some authentic connections of, guess what? I don't have it all together. And I think 2020 has given us permission to just be real. Let's be honest and say, I'm trying to figure it out. Or, you know what? I'm struggling today. Sometimes being honest about where we are starts creating those authentic relationships. So I want you to think about for yourself, where can you be your most vulnerable? Where are you your most vulnerable? Are there things that prevent you from being your authentic self? And if you're like me and you're in that battle with that perfectionist mentality, think intently about what do you need uniquely to dismantle that for yourself? Because I tell you, if we're able to crack the code for ourselves first, then we can do that for other spaces. I want to read something to you that came from the book called The Moment of Lift, written by Melinda Gates. And it's a powerful quote that a colleague shared with me that I want to share with you. It says, I realized that maybe my best self is not my polished self. Maybe my best self is when I'm open enough to say more about my doubts, my anxieties, admit my mistakes, confess when I'm feeling down. Then people can feel more comfortable with their own mess. And then it's easier, and that's an easier culture to live in. I don't know about you, but that quote really resonated with me in thinking about if we want to be the best versions of ourselves, maybe being polished isn't the way to do so. So tip number 1, inclusion starts with I. Think about how you can be your most authentic self and challenging yourself to be able to do that in every space possible. The second tip that I want to lean into is really thinking about social inclusion. So we talk about inclusion in general, but there are actually several different types. So when you think about social inclusion, this is about people feeling accepted for who they are. Now, this is really important because there was a study that said 50% of individuals sometimes or always feel like no one knows them. This was a study also done in that same research through Cigna. So I'm going to say that again, 58% of people sometimes or always feel like no one knows them. So social inclusion is all about helping people feel accepted, not helping them feel accepted, but demonstrating that people are accepted for who they are. So how can we demonstrate that? Well, I think the first step is really being curious, really getting to know not just what job you do, what role you play, but who you are. Being curious a little bit about, how did you get here? Tell me about your journey, your life's experiences, your joys, the things that, motivate you. If you happen to see a picture or they tell you that they're going to an event, following up and being curious is really an important skill to building that social inclusion. The more we ask questions, the more we learn. The more questions we ask about others, the more connected that we have the potential to feel. Now, it doesn't mean that every time we ask a question, people are going to give us an answer. But I think the mere demonstration of curiosity is a powerful way to help build that social inclusion. Now, what we do with the information that we hear is also really important. We don't want to be performative and just ask for the sake of asking and checking it off as a box, but actually using that as a way to also share more about yourself. And that's where you start building those high quality relationships that the experience of community really gets us to that sense of belonging. So think about, what are some questions you can ask? Think about the people that you are in proximity to and the people that you're not. What do you know about them? What could you learn? And demonstrating curiosity in meetings is also another way. You can do it. Doesn't have to be when you're out of the meeting. You could say, hey, I love your earrings. Where did you get that? Or, right, there's small ways that you can really just show that you care about people beyond the work. Because, hey, we all have busy lives. We all have to do work, right? We all work to live. But people want to be seen for that human essence that we all bring. And I'm more than my job title. I am a mother, but I'm also more than a mother and a wife, right? There's so much more. We have so many layers, but being curious helps us really start to make people feel like you're okay with hearing their story, their lived experiences, and our responses to what they share is also important. Being really thoughtful and just saying, thank you for sharing, and being willing to share as well. The third tip you want to think about is emotional inclusion. So we talked a little bit about social inclusion, about feeling accepted for who you are, but emotional inclusion is really about those meaningful relationships. So when it comes to meaningful relationships, I have a little stat here I want to share with you. Nearly 4 in 10 agree with the statement, I feel that I do not have close personal relationships with other people. Now, the definition of close is, in the eye of the beholder, but I think that stat is really powerful for us to think about. It says, I feel that I do not have close personal relationships. So it could be that we see each other and we say hello quite often. But I think for me, that stat invites us to be able to be much more curious and to be able to share parts of ourselves and really get to know kind of not just who you are, but also how are you feeling? I've done in my team meetings, one of the things that I started to do, we do what we call check-ins. Check-ins are a great way to be able to create space beyond the work. And our check-in is simply, where do you find yourself today? Now, 2020, on any given day, we found ourselves on a different emotional roller coaster. But we were able to really learn more about each other by allowing emotions to be shared. Sometimes people feel as though, emotions have to be left at the door. But think about it. The door is my home today, in many cases, for most people. So you can't really leave them at home. They're with you. So there's power in being able to just check in. The other day, I sat with someone, we jumped into a Zoom meeting and they looked just a little, I could just tell they were transitioning from another meeting. And I said, how are you? And the person said, oh, you don't really want to know how I am anyway, and just kind of joked. And I said, no, really, how are you really? We wound up having a great discussion about the realities. The person wasn't good. There was a challenge that they were facing and they were a little stressed about it. It was a great opportunity to demonstrate humanity and just listen. Not that I had to solve, but checking in and just seeing how people are feeling can give you so much insight, but also help foster that relationship. So think about places that you can check in. And sometimes I see people who say, how are you? And they go immediately with fine. But sometimes I've heard people say, how are you? And the person goes on to tell them how they're feeling. And the person goes, that's good. And they keep going because we're on autopilot. We have to get out of autopilot and really pause and look one another in the eye to hear the things that are not being said. That's a tip for moving to more inclusive and connected spaces. The other tip that I want you to think about, we're almost there. We're almost to our final tips here. But the other tip I want to share is really intellectual inclusion. So what do I mean by that? What does it mean to intellectually include someone? Well, this is all about really honoring the contributions that they could have to the community. We all have a variety of skills, knowledge, and experiences that probably supersede any job description or role that you could ever imagine. But even if it is based solely on the job description, people want to know that their thoughts, their ideas, their opinions, and their expertise, and quite simply their perspective, is valued. So thinking intently about how we can, in spaces, call out and call for other perspectives of other individuals. Making sure that if there's a silent person in the room, that we lean in and say, what are your thoughts about this? How might you approach this scenario? Giving people space to be able to demonstrate their knowledge really does foster that intellectual inclusion, that not only am I here physically, but that I'm here intellectually. You know, the emotional inclusion is about being here from our hearts, but our heads have to be engaged in this work as well. And when you can leverage the bright ideas and the perspectives, and sometimes it doesn't even have to move into an actual, program or idea. Just the act of sharing is enough for people to feel heard and intellectually valued. So be thinking about how might you, in various spaces, try to create space for voices that go unheard, for skills that have either maybe been untapped or have yet to be tapped. Really just create space for them to be able to share their ideas. The more people are able to contribute, the more likely they are to feel connected to whatever structure of community that they're operating in. But we know we're truly going for that experience. So the last tip I'll give you as we near the end here is really thinking about creating community structures. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, you said we should really focus on the experience of community. Well, creating community structures is another powerful way to also foster a sense of belonging. You want to think about, if you're thinking about, for example, an organization, do you have formal community structures beyond your departments that people can plug into? Groups like communities of practice, or employee resource groups, or volunteer resource groups, or affinity groups. Some even have community interest groups that are non-work related at all. It's just communities for artists and communities for musicians. Some organizations are really leaning that way just so that people can feel the opportunity to connect in various ways. And as you're thinking about the community structures from an organizational standpoint, know that I'm definitely a great resource if you want to talk more about what are some examples of different communities you'd like to launch. But I also want you to really go back to my first, tip, which was inclusion starts with I. We can create community structures everywhere we go. In one conversation with someone, we can make someone feel in community. We can make a connection off of maybe an idea or demographic. We can connect in so many different ways. Be thinking about, how do I create a sense of community, whether I walk into the grocery store and say hello and spend a little extra time talking to someone, or if it's in a meeting and actually postponing the agenda for a little bit just to create community space before we get to the work. Either way, the structure of community is important to still keep in mind. And if you think intentionally about what exists and what could exist, you might be creating new pathways for people to find community. Now, I've heard this phrase. I don't know if you've heard this before, but it's a I don't want to date myself, but I hear some of the younger demographics are saying, no new friends. There's this tagline I heard, no new friends, which really highlights I have a really great community. I have a really great network of people. And I thought about that the other night and I thought, wow, if we all say no new friends, or if we're all so set with just our own community structures, what does that mean for the broader community? And that's why I think it's important for us to be willing to open the door to building new friendships, not just from a work standpoint, but opening the door to build a sense of community that extends beyond the buildings, but out into our neighborhoods and out into our nation more broadly. So I'll leave you with this quote to think about, because all of this that we've been talking about, and I saw someone put it in the chat earlier, is connection, the power of connection. And this quote from Brene Brown just really resonates with me. She says, I define connection as that energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from that relationship. We so need one another, but we all have the ability to foster connection and community in every space that we frequent. Again, community tells us already that I can commit, and I have the power to foster and lead inclusive and connected spaces everywhere I go, and so do you. So I hope you found a great takeaway or a nugget for your own spaces and the work that you do. And thank you so much for the work that you do in your communities each and every day. It has truly been an honor to spend some time with you.